Hello Year 7 and 8, it's Ms Norton, the shorter one, not the tall one. You may have been taught by me, you may not, but this week I am talking you through your work at home. You should have this week have read and done the first activity in your booklet. If you haven't, it is a good idea to go and do that now, just because it's about getting ready for reading. We will be going through some ideas to kind of help you approaching this task. So if you haven't done task 1, please don't go and do that, because task 2 is actually to watch this PowerPoint. This week we're carrying on with the Key Stage 3 Discoveries unit, and today we are looking at colour imagery and vivid description. Our focus really is looking at the colour imagery in non-fiction texts, and it's thinking about the importance of description. And our text for study is a non-fiction text called American Notes by Charles Dickens. Now, I've said, by now you should have started thinking about a few different ideas. As you can see in the middle of the screen, that's a front cover. It's not the most exciting front cover I've ever seen, but it does kind of start to suggest some things that maybe or may not have been clear to you. So on the left, we've got the American flag. That's what I think of when I think of America. I think of vibrant New York, the Statue of Liberty, burgers. I don't know, this, I'm being a bit stereotypical, but they're kind of my first thoughts. But the fact is, if you know anything about Charles Dickens, he lived during the Victorian era, which ended in 1901. So the kind of New York he's talking about isn't going to be the kind of New York and America that I think of. Instead, on the right, that picture that does look very Victorian, the lady in a big bustle and big skirt, and the gentleman in his top hat and a coach and you can't see them in the picture, but horses. That's what I think when I think of Victorian, but it makes me think of England. But that painting is actually of America during this period. The picture below is clearly a city, but it's not got the big, massive, huge skyscrapers I associate with New York, but that's New York in the Victorian times. So if from doing task 1 you still weren't quite sure what I'm talking about when I'm talking about America in Dickens times, this is the kind of thing. It does look slightly different, but by all means it was still absolutely a bustling, busy place in America. So what were the questions and what did you come up with? So I said, first of all, what is non-fiction? And hopefully you've written something down. Now if you've put it's true or it's real, that's a really good place to start. But it's generally is based on fact, but it can be quite objective. It can be where someone's looking at the facts and kind of then just showing you sort of different views. You lose credibility if it's fabricated. You've got to tell the truth, but it is an author's point of view. So you could have 2 non-fiction texts, one that thinks a place is wonderful and one that thinks a place is horrible. Now they're both fact, but they're very different opinions. So we need to be careful. In your history lessons, you might read non-fiction that's just facts, but you might read someone's interpretation of events, and so that's slightly different. But what does non-fiction means? It means it's based on fact, but it can be someone's opinion. I then asked you what a travelogue was. Now you might know a bit of the words in here, obviously travel, to move around, but log, as in like a dialogue, that's 2 people, and log is the idea, that word comes from talking. So a travelogue is literally talking about what you did. Now, obviously, you're not going to talk to people in Victorian times. You're going to have to write it down and print it. But that's exactly what Dickens did. The map below, I didn't make this map, but this is his journey in that year from January to June. And he went all over America. Now, you can see New York on there, and that's where our extract that you're going to read in a minute is from. But you've travelled all over America. And this kind of leads into the next question I asked you, which was, well, why would people want to read this? Why would they want to read about his travels in 1842? Maybe you thought about something along the lines of the fact that many people just didn't get to travel. Travel was very expensive. It was also very dangerous. The picture on the right, that's a ship, and it's not just any old ship. It is the ship that Dickens travelled in. It's obviously a painting, and it's called the Britannia, that very British sounding, because although by now America's independent, it still has really strong ties to England. Now you might think a big steamship like almost the Titanic, but the Titanic sunk in 1912, so ships have got a long time to improve. You can see it's got a funnel, so it runs on ship, but to be honest, steam, sorry, but it does actually, doesn't it, look very like a pirate ship to me. It doesn't look very strong, and they had to make this really long journey across the ocean in this. And so you can see why maybe people would read what Dickens had wrote instead of actually being able to go there themselves. For most people, if you did make this journey, and some people did, you didn't come back, you were migrating, you were going to America forever. So what Dickens did, this travel, was very unusual. And part of that, there he is, good old Dickens, very nice beard. Part of that is because Charles Dickens was a celebrity during his time. He was very rich. He wrote lots of books. You might have heard of Oliver Twist, Great Expectations, Christmas Carol. And so he had the money to go over. And it says, in this chapter, we'll look at Charles Dickens in New York. What might he see? Well, you might have said the Statue of Liberty, and I wouldn't blame you. But the Statue of Liberty wasn't actually constructed in 1842, so we couldn't have seen that. Central Park, the big park in New York, that wasn't there either. But there's nothing wrong if you've said these things, and actually in a later activity today, you could use those monuments when you do a bit of creative writing. But definitely you would have seen the Broadway, the big sort of main artery through the city. You would have seen huge buildings compared to sort of a lot of British cities. So any sort of ideas about urban, really busy, lots of carriages, obviously horse-drawn, not cars yet, but it still had this bustling atmosphere. Sorry, the slide just moved on then. That was atmosphere. I was saying that New York has this bustling atmosphere. The last question, question 5, I said there's some wonderful description in the text, but 3 words used to describe New York listed below. What impression of New York do they give you? And I really hope you've thought about what that word means to you. In purple, you can see some things I thought I might write. So for metropolis, busy city, this word makes me think New York will be bustling and full of life and new technology, fashion and travel. For gaudy, meaning bright and flashy, this word makes me think New York will be an assault on the senses, lots of colours listed after each other. For gilded, which means edged with gold, this word makes me think New York will be decadent and rich because many wealthy people live there. Whatever you've put, think about whether you've really thought through what those words mean and get in your head kind of what you are expecting when you read. Those 5 questions you've done hopefully have got you thinking about getting ready to read, because that's so important when we start reading and thinking about where it's set, what we expect, because even if the text is different to what we expect, that's important because we can start thinking, well, why is it different? Okay, so to move on, now on to task 3. Listening to this narrated PowerPoint was task 2, so you've done that, brilliant. After this PowerPoint video finishes, you want to go on to task 3 and you want to read that extract independently, but I'm just going to walk you through some things I would think about. So we're still reading with purpose, not just reading for no reason, we're thinking about a purpose, and you know that's all to do with imagery, it's all to do with description. I said that at the start of this video. It says, reading with purpose. Below is an extract from American Notes by Charles Dickens. In this extract, he has arrived in New York. You know those things, we've talked about it being non-fiction, it's true based on his experiences. You know Charles Dickens was a famous writer, he's a lot of money, he's gone to this exciting place, and he's in New York, this big city. It is said to be a very vivid description. Vivid means it creates very clear, lifelike, colourful images. Okay. As you read, think about which parts are very vivid. So as you are reading, you might want to have a little piece of paper next to you and you just want to be jotting down words, phrases, anything you think that bit is particularly vivid. So if we just look at the start, it says chapter 6, New York, the beautiful metropolis. We've talked about the word metropolis before. We know it means this massive city. We've talked about how it means it's bustling, it's busy. So straight away I can tell it, yep, it's got to be vivid because it's this big city. Of America is by no means so clean a city as Boston. So he doesn't think it's as clean as this other city, Boston. But many of its streets have the same characteristics, except the houses are not quite so fresh coloured. So there's something a bit dirty about New York. It's not quite as fresh. The signboards are not quite so gaudy. Oh, but it's not quite so very bright. It's maybe not quite so very brash. The gilt letters are not quite so golden. The bricks are not quite so red. The stone not quite so white. And the blinds and area railings not quite so green. And the knobs and plates upon the street doors not quite so bright and twinkling. You can probably hear that repetition there, that listing. He's showing how it goes on and on and on. And to me, that shows how New York is this sprawling, massive metropolis. And he's doing that through the rhythm of his writing. And this is just the first paragraph. You're going to read the rest and you'll see this. Look out for it. Look out for this repetition. Quite so, quite so, quite so. Even that intensifier, so is showing how New York is different in this paragraph, but in later paragraphs he uses the listing to kind of show how overwhelmed he is by all that he can see. So do look out for that. At the end of task 3, I've just added you a thing in a little bit that says, after reading the text, what are 3 ways Dickens makes this a very vivid piece of writing? And a little comedy picture of Dickens having a think there. You could write down 3 features you've found. You could write down 3 words. Now, if you've been making notes as you read, you may have already done this, and that's great. But if you're someone that likes to read it first, this is your chance to go back and start picking bits out. Once you've done that, you've done task 3. The next task is task 4, exploring the setting. Below I've selected some quotes to start inferring and exploring the setting. Please answer the questions on line paper, and there are 3 questions. I'll talk you through the first one. In the text, Dickens focuses on the Broadway, the main road, writing the Great Promenade. So the Great Promenade is an old-fashioned way of saying the Great Big Promenade Road, the big road. And thoroughfare, as most people know, is Broadway, a wide and bustling street with stretches from the gardens to a country road and maybe 4 miles long. I've put, how do adjectives in this create the impression that the Broadway is an impressive place? Explain your answer in full sentences and use words and phrases from the quote. And the idea is to try and get at least 25 words. So I've started you off. Dickens suggests the Broadway is an impressive place through the use of the adjective and pick out an adjective. Remember, adjectives are those describing words, but usually before a noun. So go back to that quote. Can you pull some out? Can you explain which conveys, which suggests? What does that word suggest? There are 2 more questions similar to this. They get slightly harder each time. I've given you a quote. And the idea is, can you practice that key skill of pulling out keywords, pulling out language features and explaining? The last task, get creative. There's 3 kind of questions. The first 2 are just little activities. 1, colour vocabulary. What other words do you know for red, for yellow, for green? The task will ask you to do it, and on the next page there are answers. Don't look till you've had a go. The second activity is to watch a short clip. There's a link and it's sort of advertising, come to New York. It's about 6 minutes long. You don't have to watch the whole clip if you don't want to, but you do need to get 10 words from that, 10 adjectives to describe New York, you know, things like bustling and words we've already covered. You can take words out of the Dickens text. And that leads to the main task. You can invent a new character or you can use your character from the last few weeks. Imagine your character was in New York City. Describe their experience in the city using colours to create imagery and a sense of mystery maybe. Remember you did things last week on The Lion, the Witch and the Wardrobe. Now yours is a non-fiction piece, but you could still travel through a door, you could travel into a new space. In addition to ambitious verbs and a range of punctuation. Aim for about 200 words and remember to plan. There is help with this in the booklet. I taught you through a 5-point plan. Plans can be little mind maps, lists, but if you fail to plan, then you plan to fail. We really need to make sure we're planning our creative writing. Now, I hope I've gone through some useful things. I hope I've made the task clear. If there's anything you're not sure about, as always, leave a comment on Show My Homework for your teacher or send them an email and we'll always be happy to help. Best of luck, Year 7 and 8. You'll be fantastic. Thank you for listening.